I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Well, our guest today is Aron Ralston. All of you will have heard about Aron. He is the man who back in 2003, during a solo descent in Utah, had his hand pinned to the side of a canyon wall. He was there for 5 days. He couldn't release it. He was running out of water. He had accepted he was going to die when he found the strength, the ability to break his arm off, to cut it off, pull it off, so he could escape and get home. And the way he did so is absolutely amazing. He thought about the children he might have. He thought about his family. He made peace with himself. So he's talking today both about what happened to him, but also about how he found a way through it. It's an incredible episode. Keep listening. And again, thank you for joining us. Well, Aron, look, it's such a great pleasure to speak to you. I know many of our listeners know your story. They know exactly what happened. And I'm sure so many of them have asked themselves that same question. If they were in that position, could they find the strength, the resilience to do what you did? And I suppose I'll start off by asking you the question of, before it happened, were you aware that you had this level of resilience, that you had strength that would allow you to do this?
No, and I appreciate the chance to talk to you, Benjamin. And yeah, especially to get into this about resilience, because I think those are some of the big lessons that I've taken from what happened for me. And I do say that intentionally, that it's what happened for me, not what happened to me. But I wondered that exact question. And I think if you had proposed the specifics of what I encountered in Blue John Canyon back in 2003, I would have doubted that you had the right guy. Like, no, you're talking about somebody else. But the curiosity I had about what was in me and who I am and how would I respond in the face of a life or death situation was something that I had very consciously considered from reading other people's stories of misadventures, especially some of the books that actually got me so passionate about mountaineering in the first place and outdoor adventuring. Going back to in the mid 90s, 1996, there was the big storm on Mount Everest that resulted in 11 people who died, including guides and clients. And I mean, some of the most elite mountaineers at the time. And I wondered, who would I be in that situation? Would I be the guy who's, left to die and find something to come back from the dead and walk back into camp?
It's so funny you say that, because before the attack in Ukraine, and whenever I was out in conflict zones and I saw people who were injured, I always asked myself the same question: how would I react? What would it be like for me? And I, like you, I don't think I ever knew the answer until you were in that position. And I think you've touched on something really important, which is that I think maybe we do need to spend more time looking at ourselves and thinking about whether we do or don't have that strength, because I suppose in some ways you should be prepared for anything that might happen. And perhaps life is about getting ready for if something bad happens. Do you agree?
And at the same time, I think, yes, there's preparation. And certainly my experience in the outdoors prior to 2003, which included, probably more than a dozen times up to that point when I'd gotten in a situation where I'd almost died. Even just in the months prior, having survived a nearly fatal avalanche with two of my companions, that one of them was buried and his airway was obstructed for many minutes before we could extricate him. These kinds of very close calls were, in a way, stepping stones to discover what was inside of me, what I was capable of. And yet we never really get to find that out until we are up into a situation of perhaps of the greatest adversity we've ever faced in our lives. Maybe like what you've found too.
No, absolutely. And I want to come to what happened that day, but you raised something interesting there, which is, you had a couple of near fatal incidents, or you were around near fatal incidents, and yet you went back. It didn't stop you from continuing to adventure, to continue to go out. And I wonder, some people will say, didn't you learn the lesson? Shouldn't you have stopped? But I guess you probably don't think it in the same way.
No, right. About like, come on, this is why we don't go outside. Yeah, choose a better path, Aaron. And even after my amputation, it was still something that was driven by passion of still, and some of it is about just like what we have evolved from. It's we're programmed to be in nature and to connect and to find the deepest, I think, aspects of our personalities in nature, and at the same time, there's also still ego involved in a lot of it. And I was someone who, in my adolescence, had endured a lot of bullying and being told that I wasn't good enough, really, by my peers, even though I excelled academically and was moved ahead in school and ultimately graduated at the top of my class in high school and in college. And it was this process of continuously trying to prove that I was good enough. And that is something, until you identify it and really work on it, is never satisfied, of course. So yeah, it's especially after an amputation, like, am I good enough? Well, now I've got an even more, like, potentially you could say, a deficit to overcome in order to prove that I'm still good enough.
Do you still feel as if you have to prove something?
I not as overtly, especially because I think with a lot of awareness and counseling work for the last 20 years, and that I've done what I can to try to bring myself to a different place of seeing myself as enough, and still as a parent. Like, it's probably the place where it comes up most often is, well, look at my kid's behavior. Like, this reflects on my parenting, obviously. So, I must not be doing this well enough yet. And so it's good to consider, okay, there's always room for improvement, but to not feel like you're inadequate or you're not lovable or that you'll never find, deep meaning in your life because, if somebody's teasing or they're bullying or whatever else that it might be, or your own self-critic that's working at you. So to say, yeah, you learn lessons along the way, and still that's the big one that for a lot of us, we're trying to heal that little, like, wounded child inside of us, and say that it's okay to have big feelings, it's okay to have moments where you make big mistakes even, and to then, like, do the repair and the acceptance work and try to grow from it. And that's ultimately the point, is that we try to take something, a trauma, an adversity, a challenge, that, headwinds in life, and that we adapt, we grow, we benefit from them, we learn lessons, that we find opportunities. And that's really what I hope to remind people of, that if they look at me and see what I went through and wonder about what's inside of them, I'd like to say it's inside of you as well. But the only way you get there is by going through the crucible of the greatest adversity of your life.
100%. And every time you fail or you fall, you pick yourself up and you are stronger than you were before. You learn something every step of the way. And, you've exhibited that. And I wondered if you could take us back to that day and briefly talk to us about, what happened.
Yeah, it started out as a hike that I was out running a shuttle. So I biked 15 miles, and then I was going to hike 15 miles down through this slot canyon in southern Utah called Blue John Canyon. It's out on the western side of Canyonlands National Park, which a lot of people have at least heard of, if not visited, out there in the Moab region. And that I was on my own, aside from a couple hours where I happened upon two young women who were also in the same canyon in the upper stretches of it for a few miles. We hiked together and down climbed through various overhangs and obstacles in the bottom of the canyon. Slot canyons, for people who aren't totally familiar, are canyons that are much more narrow than they are deep. So this one at times might be only shoulder width across, but 100 feet, 10 stories deep. These like sunken chasms that you're walking through. And we had equipment, ropes, and such there are some rappels in, kind of quasi-technical sections of the canyon. But eventually we parted ways, and then I was on my own. And at about 2:45 in the afternoon, I got to a drop off that was about 12 feet from where I was standing in the bottom of the canyon. And then what would have been a very constricted, like, waterfall if there were flash floods happening, which is how these canyons are carved out. but boulders had been tumbled down over this little drop off, and they were, again, kind of almost like a staircase that I would be descending. But as I was dangling from my arms and holding onto the stone that was at the top of this drop off, I dislodged it. I fell to the bottom of the canyon. And as the boulder was falling from my head, I put my hands up to try to protect myself. And I got my head and my torso out of the way, but of course I've exposed my arms. And the rock smashed first into my left hand, and then it ricocheted and smashed into my right hand. And a gap opened up between the boulder and the wall, where then my right arm went further into that space just as it was annihilated. There was a constriction in the walls of the canyon there, like this hourglass tapering that right in front of my chest, and the rock slammed down, becoming wedged just as it had been, but about 7 feet lower down, right in front of my torso, and having ensnared my arm in this impossibly small shadow that was less than a half inch across. My arm has been crushed at my wrist, right about where you would wear a watch, between the boulder and the wall of the canyon.
What was the pain like? Was there an immediate amount of agony at the time?
Yeah, I mean, there's always that split second kind of lag between the time it takes for the signals to travel from an injury like up to your brain, and then all of a sudden, yeah, it was the most intense thing I'd ever felt in my life, and the adrenaline that followed from that jolt, of course, just made it pulse more and more and more with every beat of my heart. The pain in my wrist, but I lost control. I'd never encountered a sensation of that magnitude before, and I was thrashing about, an animal in a trap, trying to rip my arm free, trying to pull the boulder, trying to lift it, anything I could do, punching it, cursing at it. I could offend it, into letting me go. But for an hour, it was just all futile fury and rage and frothing exertion. And
Can I ask quickly before you go on?
No.
Why you find that fun? Like, I'm watching you and you're laughing while you're telling it, and I find that really interesting.
But I think because I've learned, especially I think as most people do in a moment of crisis, panic and fury really are often not the answer. They usually only make things worse. And so I'm laughing at in some ways my naivete in that moment, because what eventually I was able to do after that hour was to take a few deep breaths, calm myself, and get into a place, because as a mechanical engineer in my background, as you can probably tell, I'm a thinker kind of person, that to lose myself in that emotional state was totally counterproductive. And I ended up wasting a lot of my bodily resources in that hour, that I would of course come to need. The 1 liter of water that I had at the moment when I became trapped, I ended up chugging almost a third of that after about 45 minutes through, and then realizing that was the thing that shocked me into calm, was that's my life, that water bottle. And I just drank a third of it. And that now I have, a matter of ounces, 20, 24 ounces, maybe now to survive on for who knows how long while I'm trapped here.
So once
stupid mistakes, yeah.
Once you had calmed yourself, you'd drunk the water, you'd sort of thought about it. What were your thoughts then? My hand is stuck. There is no way of me getting it out. Or was it, I will just wait here and someone will eventually find me and rescue me, or I have to get my arm out? What were you thinking?
Yeah, all of that. And so that's the thing. First, what I like to prescribe for folks is what I found for myself there is that you first calm yourself, and that's to stop whatever you're doing, take as many deep breaths as it takes, and then start to think. You've set us, giving yourself a pause between the emotional reaction in the moment, and to really be more considered and deliberate about it, to start brainstorming. And that's what we all have, again, these tools in our minds that we can use in whatever situation we might find ourselves. And that for me, this problem solving mode kicked in. The engineer in me again, that thinking through how am I trapped? Making observations, coming up with some options, and then finally deciding on a plan. And of course, like doing nothing, just waiting for help. Maybe the young women that I'd encountered earlier in the day would come back after I didn't make it to our rendezvous that we'd planned for the next day. Other canyoneers, maybe an intentional rescue at some point eventually that somebody might find me. But otherwise, like, okay, I have to get myself out. How am I going to do that? Trying to lift the boulder, maybe trying to carve my arm free from the rock, like by removing enough material from the boulder with this little pocket knife that I had. And of course, even in that first hour of like doing this brainstorming, that I thought, and I said it out loud, Aaron, you're going to have to cut your arm off. Which, but then I responded immediately, like, I don't want to cut my arm off. I'm having this argument, like, and then like reinforcing it in a different voice, but again, saying it out loud, like, Aaron, dude, you're going to have to cut your arm off. And so I knew, like, there was that intuition, but of course, I think reasonably, like, that idea, so extreme as it is, goes at the bottom of the list. And I started working through the other options first, trying to carve my way through the rock. I spent the first afternoon, first night, all the way to the second day. But I had such a weak tool. I wasn't able to even remove like half of a golf ball from the boulder. And I wonder, as time goes on, and 127 hours you were there for, but the mental change, you must have felt quite. Would I say you had more hope at the beginning, and then slowly, as the nights passed, the cold started to happen, that it edged away? And did you then become more panicked, more afraid, or did you manage to hold on to that strength throughout? No, a lot of emotional oscillations. Really, in the first 24 hours, I ended up exhausting all of the options that might get me free. And I understood no one was coming, because by that point, it was now Sunday afternoon, the end of the weekend. There aren't going to be other canyoneers happening upon me until possibly another weekend, by which point I'd be a skeleton stuck by this boulder. Intentional rescue. I'd gone on this hike, this canyoneering trip, without telling anyone my itinerary. And so no one knew even what state I was in, which was very counter to my typical MO of adventuring, when I would be, climbing highest and most dangerous mountains in Colorado in the wintertime solo, like, this very radical mountaineering project that I was undertaking. And I always left word, written notes from my roommates about where my truck would be parked, what route I would be on, when I would be back. And if I weren't back by that time, here's the phone number of a sheriff to call, and like start a rescue operation. I was very thorough about that. And I was on mountain rescue myself.
So why not on that occasion?
Yeah, because it was such a walk in the park with I always saw of myself like, okay, if something happens out there, I break my ankle or, something, like, I will crawl my way back. Like, I know that enough about myself. Like, I can endure very difficult things. And yet I never really considered the idea that I could become trapped somehow, not able to move, not able to and especially relatively uninjured, aside from my hand being crushed. I wasn't bleeding out from my head or anything else, but this kind of just purgatory, let's say, of being stuck in the in-between, had never really crossed my mind. But I had violated, very fundamental tenets. Like, you either go out with partners or you go out and you tell somebody where you're going, so that there can be some kind of a backup plan in place. And this was just a misestimation of what the potential consequences could be.
More of our conversation right after this. There was a time, though, when you thought you weren't going to make it, and you actually recorded videos to your family, which I think is absolutely amazing. When I was injured, I took some videos of my injuries as well, and then I was afraid that they would upload to the cloud, and the last thing that my family would see were all my injuries. So I deleted them at the time. But You were
Oh,
leaving
interesting.
Yeah, I was like, well, I can't let that be the last memory they have. Better
Yeah.
delete them. But you didn't. You actually said goodbye to your family.
Maybe the advantage of being in a less connected era back in 2003.
Yeah.
And I mean, even today out in the canyons, there's not cell service like down in that spot, not within, you know, tens of miles in any direction from that spot.
What did you say?
Um,
What did you say to your family?
yeah, so once I'd run out of options, even including the idea that I could cut my arm off, I understood it was just a slow act of suicide because even despite a tourniquet that I'd improvised, I was so far from medical assistance, probably 8 to 10 hours from a hospital, that I would never survive escaping. And so I knew by mid afternoon on that Sunday, the second day of my entrapment, that I was standing in my grave. And at that point, I think a lot of people could, yeah, it sounds like it, you know, that you had similar considerations and thoughts that, you know, we think of our loved ones. And that's really where the boulder gave me the first gift of my entrapment, was to show me what's truly important in life. I turned on that video camera and I started looking into that lens. And as I spoke to first my parents, my mom, my dad, and then my sister, go on to include, you know, all of my extended family and my best friends, as I say, my chosen family, that it was to say thank you and I love you and I'm sorry. And that was ultimately what connected me with this source of love inside of me, which is where everything else comes from when we think about courage or strength or resilience or grit, determination and perseverance, and, you know, all the rest of it. There's a source of that, and it's in our connection with those who are most close to us. That was ultimately then what gave me everything else that I would need in order to hold on. And when I hit bottom at times, like by day 3, I decided, well, you know, I'm just dying here. Why not take the chance of dying on the way out of here and at least give myself an opportunity? I tried cutting my arm. I couldn't. The knife was too dull. I couldn't even get the hair through, like, off my skin there. But to pick up that camera again and connect, and to find that the more I expressed gratitude, that the less despair that I could also experience in the same moment. That those things kind of, you know, displace one another. That the more that I could say thank you and I love you, and to even just to again make those amends and apologies, that it brought peace to me at times when otherwise I would have been in the darkest, and I were at times, like, in the darkest moments of my life, but it wasn't only that. And I found this tool of using the camera and looking through that lens and imagining that I was with the people that I was talking to, that it brought me back up. It elevated, it buoyed.
It's absolutely amazing, because we share something in common, which is that after the second bomb, you know, knocked me out,
Mm-hmm.
the first thing I saw was my daughter, and I was totally blacked out, and I was almost gone, and I saw my daughter. And everything else that ever mattered, all the concerns you usually have in life, all the worries, they disappeared. And you know how many people I've spoken to who have near-death experiences who say they go to one place alone? It is their family. And the power and the strength that gives you can make you get through anything. And it saved me that day. And it saved you too. It's amazing.
Over and over.
You passed out. Am I correct in saying you saw a young boy?
Yeah, no, that's why I was getting teary eyed there, just listening to you and empathizing with that. And I feel it's so fundamental to our experience in these, you know, human bodies, is that there's this spiritual connection that we have with I think it's the energy that runs through the universe. It's love. And that, yeah, I was able to keep myself going for those 5 days. By the 5th night, though, as I knew that it was going to be the last night that I would have there, I was so convinced. I etched my epitaph into the wall of the canyon, and I was ready to die. And it was okay. I kept saying that out loud. It's okay. It's okay. And that was where, in the darkest moments of that darkest night of my entire existence, this little boy appeared, and I left that place. I went into a living room where he was playing on the floor, and I still have this very, incredibly vivid both memory of that and how it played out in my life, because it was a vision of my future son. And he got me through a night that I had said I wasn't going to see. I'd etched April 30th into the wall of the canyon there, and May 1st came, and I was still there thanks to that little blonde haired, blue eyed kid who I would eventually meet 7 years later when he was born. And then last year on the 20th anniversary, I was able to take him and his sister out to go to that place and stand by that boulder and to share that this is where I first met you. And what you did for me here was to get me through time that I was convinced utterly that I would never see the dawn on the other side of that night.
Nice.
But I did. Yeah.
Wow. And when you woke up that next day, you found extra strength. You found the ability to move forward.
And I guess to just parse that a little bit, that I actually didn't pass out. There was some kind of like moment there where maybe in 30 seconds of real time, I had this like out of body experience, but the physical constraints of the boulder and how the pain would shift if I lost, muscular composure there, if I weren't standing at least even in the little seat that I'd created, if I dropped too low, which you would if you actually slept, the angle would change on my arm was pinched and it would spike the pain. And so I never slept for those 6 days that I was there. But I did get through to that morning, and it was almost then in a moment where I did lose control. My hand was decomposing, and not to be too graphic here, but to say I was using the knife tip to try to clean the dirt and dust off of the exposed part of my hand. It caught some of the flesh there that peeled back like the skin of milk, that's maybe boiled, and that it the knife slipped into that fleshy part of the top of the base of my thumb, and this gas escaped, and it just it repulsed me so deeply that I was panic stricken for a moment. And as I thrashed about there and just was like, it's trash, get rid of it, just rip your arm out of there. And I felt the bone then. And that was this epiphany then, as I explained about having a knife that was too dull to cut my arm off, that I realized, you don't have to cut the bone, Aaron. You can use the boulder. Use the boulder. Use the boulder. It's this eureka light bulb experience. And all of a sudden I'm smiling and I'm bending my arm and I break the bone there, and the smile gets even bigger. And then I realize there's a second bone there. And it's like, okay, but again, reverse the forces. And I bend my arm upwards and I break the second bone there, and the smile gets even bigger. And so I was like now just in euphoria that I'm going to do this. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to get home. I'm going to get a hug from my mom. I'm going to see that little boy at some point down the line in the future. And it's with this beaming, glorious, ecstasy that I start amputating my arm. And I was smiling all the way through with each cut that I made. It was a cut towards freedom. And that yes, by the time I got to where the nerve was, I wasn't smiling for a few moments there, because I had to do something that was even an order of magnitude more intense than the pain of the boulder on my arm. But I cut through the nerve, and that was the crux. It felt like, this vaporizing, like as if I thrust my arm into a magma, like just wow. Incinerated my whole section of my body. But after a few deep breaths and that bodily calming, I was able to open my eyes again. And at that point I was smiling the biggest smile I probably could ever conceive of smiling in my life, that I was going to do this. And I was just down to those last few strands, which I had to pull some traction, like you have to stretch fabric to get through. And then that last piece of skin gave way. And
what an interesting, fascinating to be in the worst moment of your life, but perhaps the best moment of your life, right exactly at the same time.
Yeah. No, I mean, to think of something even more gruesome that one would do to your own self,
No.
and yet, yeah, to have this experience of what it was for me was the greatest thing that's ever happened for me in my life.
Wow.
That it was to step free and into my life again, and then to have the possibility of everything that might happen from there forward was present in that moment, and that was actually when I almost passed out, because we're not wired to be able to handle that level of possibility, really, that we're just so much is there.
I suppose most people, you give a lot of talks at the moment. You're an incredible speaker out there. And I suppose one of the big messages is what you just described, is that it doesn't have to be something as drastic as what you went through, but that everyone should know that you are able to turn bad into good if you think about it and if you find a way. And I guess your message, and I've heard you speak, is always, don't let don't let something that seems impossible defeat you. Find a way through, and you have the strength to do it.
I do think that our mindset has a huge role in that. That nothing, as I believe Shakespeare that wrote, that nothing is good or bad so much as what we think of it, and that it's the choices that we make, and that was the legacy that my dad left for me. That we don't get to control what happens to us, Aaron, but we do get to control how we respond. To give yourself a little bit of a break, a pause, to consider your options, come up with a plan in those moments of crisis, to even reflect in the moment when something is happening, as I've had so many other adversities in my life, to consider maybe this is here for me to help me in a way, so that I can grow through this, that there's going to be a lesson, there's going to be an opportunity. It's not always easy to be in that mindset, but if we can even just take a moment to consider that this boulder that's appeared for me in my life is not just a burden, that maybe it also is carrying the seeds of some sort of blessing that might propagate for me and blossom later on. And you have to put a lot of work into it in order to make it that. But that's where that love of our family comes in, and that it gives us everything we need, all that strength and courage and resilience to transform an adversity into an advantage. And Boulder did it in so many ways for me, so that by the time I actually walked away in those moments right after I amputated my arm, and I gathered up my rope that I was going to need for a rappel, I took my bottle of urine that I'd been drinking for days, and I clip it to my climbing harness. I turned, but I got my camera out and I took a photograph as I said thank you out loud to the boulder for everything that it had given me. Even in that moment, I had this experience of gratitude for what this had brought to my life, to understand, what's important to me, what's possible for me, to answer those questions about who am I? What am I capable of? What's true in my life? And to finally experience that smile and really understand the power of our minds and the power of connection and love, and that it's what life is about. I got all of that from that place. So it's why I've been back, not only to be out in the world and adventuring and doing other things, but also to go back to that place over 15 times now in the last 20 years, to stand there at that boulder and to cry. But it's tears of gratitude. It's to say thank you over and over again.
I still think back to the moment to when the explosion happened as well. And I always get both strength from it and in some sense peace from it. And it's a really strange feeling to think back to a moment that was so bad, but recognize that you got something positive out of it. I always have to mention that my colleagues didn't make it out of that, and that's something that can never heal. And I always talk about Pierre and Sasha and but then again, I have to say that I know that they would want us to take that loss and make our lives better and make the world better for them as well.
That's exactly it. It's about finding that purpose and meaning in something that can otherwise the trauma can very easily become a tragedy. And it also carries the potential to become transformative and even triumphant in it. And I think that so many of the people you've talked with and on the podcast here and that I've encountered in the world, and I'm sure you have as well, it's you see those choices happening. That when a family gets a diagnosis, that they work through what they're going through, and they find a way to maybe start a foundation and raise money for, awareness or for a cure, or to help others in memory of a loved one, because loss is one of the biggest adversities in our lives. Yeah. And it's something we're all going to experience. And of course, the end of our time. And so what meaning we create from that is part of the human experience. And I believe that that's that choice. That's that mindset that we can turn something that otherwise would be only a loss and to also somehow create something that we've gained. And that's, yeah.
I suppose it's quite easy to say that and to have the idea that you can turn bad into good. But what would you actually say to someone who is listening, who maybe is struggling and can't motivate themselves, can't find themselves? What would you say practically? What is that first step that they've got to do?
No, and it is, and it takes so much work. It takes so much work to change, to grow, to adapt, to create meaning, to do for others, to find purpose. And what else are you going to do? That to choose not to do that? Okay, you can. And then I believe that that's what leaves you in a place where you only feel the loss and you have not created the blessings from those boulders, which for a time, there is plenty of time in the middle of all of this to just still be there, to make it through one more night. I mean, I've been through depression in my life for most of my adulthood since I was an adolescent, and that I've gone through divorce. My dad passed away 5 years ago after diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, which is just a death sentence. And yet, what did we do for that time then? We had a few months and we gathered together as a family. We drew close. I recorded him telling stories from his life that we wanted to preserve, and that we had family visiting. And so it's to create something. And that's how you find not just like a silver lining to something, but actually what I believe is the platinum core of the adversity itself, which is that it is there for us, that we have to mine it. We have to create it. And we, in the practical sense, when you're in that darkness, I think the first and foremost thing to do is to remember the word "and." That yes, you're going through a divorce. Yes, a custody battle that for me that's lasted 7 years now. That yes, there are so many darknesses that we're going to experience and loss in our life. And that is not all that life is. Life is also the sun coming up in the morning. It's nearly springtime. We're starting to hear birds. There's little buds on the trees. That there's, just the fact that you can find gratitude for anything that is going well in your life. And there have been times where I journaled, and it was just to write 3 things each day that went well. Because you can get in a mindset where everything is awful and horrible and it's personal and pervasive and it's catastrophic. To remember, and sometimes it's small things, but there are things that are going well.
You're listening to Searching for Heroes with Benjamin Hall. We'll be right back. It's so interesting because I think a lot of people who are going through something difficult feel, if I can get past this and over this, then everything will be fine again. But what I've come to realize is that life is constantly a whole lot of different adversities. And it's never like, let's get over this one problem and we'll be fine. No, you are constantly having to sort things out. And if you realize that, then perhaps you stop worrying about each one. You realize that life is about ups and downs, and you've just got to figure them out as they come your way. I wonder if it's interesting for you because so many people must look at you and just think that you got through what must be the hardest thing anyone could ever experience. How could other things bother you? How could you have other difficulties in your life? Surely you're stronger than that. Do you find that your identity now, which must be totally about you having cut off your arm to save yourself, is it kind of overshadowed in some sense your personality and the rest of your character?
I think it is my personality and my character. And so, it's very much an expression of who I am, is that, first off, that I was out there doing that in the beginning. And then that, yes, this happened and that I'd created it. I wanted to know what would happen if my life were on the line. Subconsciously, that played out. I got to find out those answers. And then that I've been able to in my way, at least, to share about that. I kind of feel like that, in a sense, I got to be an explorer and to bring back, the story of what is at the edge of our experience, and to be able to share that, to help people through that. So I don't think it. I mean, the only thing I would say is that, like, if people then like elevate me to some like ideal, because I'm certainly not. I'm not 100% any one thing. I'm imperfect and make mistakes and mess up, and continuously am trying to then repair and grow and do the work. And that's what I still have to come back to emphasize, is that when there are these things that are happening, and they're still happening to me. I mean, there's times when we're financially insecure. There are times where our health is compromised. That to know that, like, that if you can still take a breath, that in this moment, that it's a wonderful moment to be able to separate again from like all of the the thoughts that really pull us out of that. It's a practice, and it's something I work on in meditation and yoga, and to try to give to my children so that they have that ability. It's work that we have to continue to do, and I'm no better than any other human, or worse, either. That in the effort that we have to do to keep coming back to that, to keep remembering that, okay, yeah, this is really tough, and I'm still here. I mean, I took one more photo after I took while I was in the canyon. I was coming out. I took that picture of the boulder, and the bloody hand, and good riddance to that, but thank you to the boulder. And then as I moved down and I got out of the slot and I rappelled over this 6-story cliff, I took a selfie at the bottom of that cliff, holding my arm up, with the tourniquet and the packaging that I've been able to sling my arm with some basic first aid. And this selfie that I took, looking into the camera, it was just to say, I'm still here. That I knew that, okay, at this point, that might be the final evidence that anybody has, that they understand, like, okay, at this moment, he was still coherent enough to like take a photograph. And then I put the camera away, and I got into a little bit of water. And that was all that I carried then, as I embarked on what turned into over a 6.5-mile hike to escape the canyon, until miraculously a helicopter showed up that had been directed by my mom after my manager at work had spurred this whole search and rescue. But to say that that's okay too. This whole thing is, we've gone through a global pandemic, and that we've all been dysregulated. It's just societally, globally, but we're still here.
Yeah. On the other side of all hardship, of all evil, there is good. There's something positive. You just got to work hard, get to the other side. And there is something good there. And that's why I guess people just have to keep moving forward, keep being optimistic, just like you have.
And that's where the love in our lives comes most importantly into play, because it is not something we can do on our own. And to know that, I mean, I've lost friends to suicide and being in a suicidal, contemplation myself, to know that that's when if you allow the disconnection to continue, and you don't reach out to ask for help or to try to connect, that's where it gets dangerous. And that's whether it's from my family, from my friends, my relationships, my partner today, Allison, who is there for me and all of the struggles that I have. That's where we find the strength to continue on, and maybe even the resilience to turn this into a good thing, and to find the ability to do that very much most difficult work. But it's also the most rewarding work that we have in order to grow from all of this.
Can I ask, are sort of the difficulties you have, or when you feel depression, is that connected to what happened when your hand was trapped? And is it a result of that, or is it a result of other things?
No, it's really goes back to that feeling of it, being enough that we talked about. It's about the fears that we have when we think we aren't enough, that then Are we not lovable? Are we not going to, are we not going to find satisfaction and peace in our lives? We get kind of caught up, but it's again taking ourselves out of this moment that we're in, and placing ourselves in a situation where we're either hoping for something that isn't right now, or we're afraid of something that isn't right now. And in most instances, there to remember that, okay, letting those things go, accepting what is in our lives in this very moment, and that's where we find peace. That's what I had on the 5th day that I was in the canyon, where I stopped fighting and I knew it wasn't up to me, and that I didn't have to save myself. I didn't have to keep drinking my own urine. None of it actually mattered, because it wasn't up to me. And as I accepted that, that was where I found the peace and the calm that actually carried me through the last day, and ultimately that last night, until boom, now I figured out the puzzle, of how can you cut your arm off with a knife that's too dull to get through the bone.
Well, Aron, I know that everyone listening will just get so much motivation from hearing you speak. And I think the key is that, they might think that how strong, you are and what you've gone through, but it's just a reminder that everyone has ups and downs, and that's what we must, and that's why community is so important as well. It's about helping each other, because we all go through them, every single one of them, myself included, we all do. And you can get through them if you work together. So, Aron, thank you so much for speaking with me today. Well, what a real honor to meet you and talk to you. Thank you.
No, thank you. And thank you for sharing about what you've been through, Benjamin, and for doing this, because I think it's the exact point that I'm trying to make, is that things happen in our lives, and then what are we going to do with them? And you've chosen a positive path with your life. And I hope that maybe together we can help other people to make that choice for themselves.
Absolutely. Well, you're doing it as well. Aron, what a pleasure. Take care.
Yeah, likewise.
Well, I can't help but feel so many similarities to what Aron said right there. And I think that the message he's trying to send is essential. It's about hard work. It's about community. It's about realizing that things might always go wrong, but it's about finding a way through them. And he did it in the most dramatic way possible. I mean, I've heard him talk before about how he had to tear his arm off, really. But the way that he harnessed, the strength and the ability to do so is frankly amazing. It's interesting also the mental strength there. When he realized that he was panicking, and he said he was behaving like an animal out there, he found calm. He calmed himself down. And I think that's a really important message as well. Sometimes you've got to stop the panic, stop being too worried. Think about the situation you're in. And so often, and I've experienced this many times, so often, once you take a single step back and you think about things, you can find a way through them. So sometimes it's about stop and it's about thinking. And he did that as well. So thank you for listening today. Harness exactly what you heard today. Try and pass it on. And again, if you know someone who's going through something difficult, if you know someone who's struggling, reach out, show them that there is a way through. There's a way through even the hardest of problems, the most difficult things. If you work together, you find that strength. If you tell other people about it, you calm yourself down, you enjoy the beautiful things in life, put a smile on your face, and don't stop. Give it another go. You will get through. There is good on the other side, and each and every one of you can get there. Thank you so much for listening. It's a great pleasure having you here. Thanks for listening to Searching for Heroes. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.